All right, you're listening to the Limitless Learning podcast, where we talk all things the future of education. And today I'm really excited to welcome Thomas Thompson. He's the founder of a tool called EduAid that is really helping to revolutionize the way that teachers both save time and use different tools to really streamline their classroom and their teaching and a lot of different things. So I'm excited to get into this with you today, Thomas. How you doing today?
I'm well. Thanks, Dominic, for the invite. Excited to be here.
Beautiful. Yeah, you're welcome. It's good to talk to you. So you started out as a teacher and then you had this idea for this product. So I'm curious maybe if there's a formative moment or a time when you decided, I really want to create this tool. I see a gap and maybe tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was like a compounding interest of a bunch of negative things all coalescing at one time.
Sure.
So one is I started teaching 2019, 2020 school year. So we got
Mhm.
about three-quarters of the way through the school year, and then we had COVID, and then everything kind of got flipped on its head. So my
Yeah.
first year of teaching, I had to completely throw everything that I thought I knew about education kind of out the door,
Totally.
start to understand what distance learning is like,
Yeah.
synchronous and asynchronous learning, teaching over Zoom. How do you get engagement and buy-in for students that might be laying in bed while they're in your class?
Right.
So there's that piece, right? It's like, okay, this whole practice is very fragile. It's all kind of based on institutional inertia, but if you interrupt that, things change very quickly. And that got me then thinking about, well, how do people actually learn, right? And
Mhm.
what methods may best support learning, and kind of going deep there. And that's the other compounding moment, which is it wasn't easy for me as a teacher who's not in college to get access to research on teaching and learning.
Yeah.
Everything's paywalled. And on a
Yeah.
teacher's budget, I can't pay $32 to get just one article. There's academic piracy, but that didn't sit so great with me, like there has to be
Mm.
a better way to reduce the translation cost between research and practice. How do we build
Hmm.
excellence in a field that is struggling to retain talent, which is part number
Mm.
three. The school I worked at had a really high turnover rate, 40% year over year.
Yeah.
Basically, half of your staff is a new teaching staff each year. And then how do you build competence among that staff? How do you build expertise? You need time, you need experience, you need all of these
Hmm.
things. So it's really those three things, which is one, it's really tough to get your hands on effective methods of instruction. Education is
Yeah.
very faddish. There's things that come in and come out or just repackaged versions of old things. The second is how do I then apply that in my classroom? And then the third is how do we kind of onboard new teachers into the practice?
Got it. Yeah. It's quite a widespread. So where did you go about looking for what you determined would be the best tools or modalities that you might want to include in this? How did you go about? I know you said
Mhm.
it's hard to find the proper research or what was your process like there?
So it was a roundabout way. It wasn't AI first. AI was pretty much
Yeah,
the last stop on this journey. The first piece
sure.
was around open educational resources and open educational practices. I went
Yeah.
really deep into those. My entire graduate school focus was on, my thesis was on evaluating open educational resource repositories and then looking at quality control measures which were lacking. So it was like, okay, I like the idea of OER and I like the ability to openly share resources, but one, there's huge network effects. You need a bunch of teachers to share things before it's really effective. Second, you need quality control measures, which are difficult to put in place to judge
Mhm.
different materials because teaching and learning is a very multifaceted thing and very contextually dependent. So then I ran into a lot of difficulties there. I was building a platform for open educational resource sharing and was really just banging my head against the wall doing that and really wasn't cracking the code. And it was around that time where I was feeling pretty helpless and hopeless about how do we
Mhm.
put the best practices in teachers' hands that a guy I was teaching across the hall from, science teacher. His name's also
Mhm.
Thomas Hummel. He's like, hey, I was playing with this chat GPT, just launched, I think it was GPT 3 back, 3.5 back then. He said, I asked it to make a lesson plan. He's like, and it wasn't bad. It's like, okay. So we
Yeah.
started playing with GPT and then we dove in a little bit more. We're like, okay, it is kind of bad. It's not great. This
Right.
isn't the best. This isn't the best UI for a teacher to interact with an AI. There's
Totally.
not really great guardrails. There's a lot of hallucinations, some bias seeping in terms of instructional methods. Methods that were not effective were being referenced, like talking about learning styles and things like this, which have been
Mhm.
disproven time and again. So then
Yeah.
we said, okay, well, maybe we can build the user interface that would best enable a teacher to work with AI. And while we're at it, maybe we can start building some guardrails to constrain a generative AI within evidence-based frameworks of instruction. And then I went down the rabbit hole of trying to understand these systems and getting a sense of what the technology actually is so we can establish what its affordances are and what its boundaries are. And we don't have our system go beyond those boundaries, which seem to always be changing. Yeah, so that's how we ended up at AI. It was a roundabout process where it was talking about the science of learning, talking about digital age learning, talking about open educational resources, and then we landed on generative AI systems.
Very cool. And so how did you go about taking what we currently had, right, with these GPTs and then improving it to, you mentioned guardrails, you mentioned building the interface. What was sort of the things you discovered along the way that you really wanted to implement into this product that would improve it
Mhm.
dramatically from this old model that we had, this old tool that we had available?
So there were a lot of opinions at the time and still today about what's the
Sure.
best way to work with an AI. So some people would say, you want to do it's all in the prompting. You do multi-shot prompts or chain of reasoning prompts, and you can
Mm,
provide in-context learning. And then you had like these mega prompts that were really long and spelled out all of these criteria. And they were probably more effective than zero-shotting the AI, just asking it to create a lesson plan, right? You create the parameters. So we spent a lot of
mhm.
time doing that, a lot of prompt engineering, which is just prompt design or writing. It's really what it is. You're just writing directions very
Just writing,
clearly.
yeah, yeah.
That went only so far. So then you start looking at fine tuning. You go, okay, so let's create a data set then, and then we'll annotate that data set. We'll get a bunch of generations for different educational content pieces. We'll grade
Got it.
them, and then maybe we'll do some fine tuning. Fine tuning itself really had unintended consequences as well as some benefits. So that wasn't the end all be all method. So we had tried fine tuning, we tried in context learning, we tried chain of reasoning. Then we were
Mm,
looking at multi-shot prompts. Then we were looking at chaining
mm,
different AIs together. What we
mm.
ultimately landed on, and this is as the AI models themselves were developing, you went from 3.5 to 4 to 4.0 to 4 mini to 4.1 to oh 03. This kept
Yeah,
releasing
yeah,
more and more
yeah.
models. We would stay up to date with those, right? Today, I think we're on GPT-5. By the way, we use the foundation models.
Right,
AI in education company does. No one really has their own AI, education specific AI. They don't exist. It's either fine-tuned models or some
right.
elegantly prompted models. So
Mm,
we decided, okay, you can't ask the AI to do everything at one time. That won't work. You can't create
mhm.
like bundle together a lesson with the direct instruction, then moving into practice, then moving into feedback. You have to break it down.
Yeah,
So we broke
split
everything
it up.
down
Yeah,
to we have like 125 different tools on our website, which are really
cool.
just different prompts for different aspects of what you might do as a teacher. When you
Sure.
broke it down and made it really modular, and you put the power in the teacher's hands, they stack them together, they chain them, right? So I moved from direct instruction to a maybe a choice board assignment. Then I create the
Mhm.
materials for the choice board assignment, and then you kind of go
Right, right,
iteratively
right.
from there. The other piece was you have to allow for a lot of editing. You have to make a great text editor for the teachers to jump in and be able to do this
Yeah.
work. But then we took it a step further. So we partnered with the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, CZI, a nonprofit
Mm,
organization. And we've been working with their terrific team over there and developing a set of evaluators to then take and
very
input
cool.
AI text, and then you can evaluate it on different metrics. So one might be qualitative text complexity. So what's the vocabulary and sentence structures that fit for your second grade classroom, or are you generating
Mhm.
text at a third grade level? Then it's
Yeah.
grade level appropriateness. So the material created, what are the prior knowledge assumptions in that material? How would you
Mm,
scaffold up to that? We have an upcoming release in a couple of weeks here that I'm excited about. And we're going to make those evaluators open for everyone. It won't just be a development tool for us. So then teachers can evaluate the quality of the AI generations and then iterate from there and kind of put the power in their hands, add some transparency to the product so they can actually kind of look under the hood, so to speak. But it's an ongoing process. It's a little bit of everything.
mhm.
It's kind of a hodgepodge of some prompting, some chaining, tuning. It's a little bit of
Sure.
everything to make it work.
Awesome. Yeah, there's so much to this. It sounds like quite a complex process, but the end result is something that's simple for a teacher to use, right? Something that's
Exactly.
easy. They've got everything laid out. Okay, this is something I'm used to doing, lesson planning, or maybe making a, gamified quiz kind of thing, but now they can do it a little bit more streamlined, right? And you've done all that under the surface kind of computation to make it easier. So and this is something you mentioned on your website, the teacher's time, attention, and judgment. That's like where so much of the value comes from for them. And so I'm curious, as you approached designing this product and as you've seen it implemented, what are some of the ways that teachers are reporting a difference in the way they can spend time, perhaps with students or perhaps just even in the process of creating these things or
Yeah.
creating their specifically lesson planning materials?
So much of marketing around AI tools is about ease, just how simple things can be, how you can speed up, or you'll hear things like streamline your workflow or something like this, right? And
Yeah.
that only goes so far, right? What you really want to do is you want to provide teachers with tools to quickly generate and iterate on content such that they can do three things, really. It boils down to that, which is retrieval, spacing,
Mhm.
and interleaving. If you can nail these three things well, which I think in AI it's well within its affordances to do, you provide the teachers with one, the ability to create all the supplemental materials you need to do the retrieval practice for different student populations and ability levels and things like this. You want to be able to then interleave in new content and old content together into these practice sets. So you're introducing new materials and mixing them in with the old materials in a way that is not jarring or like kind of abrupt, right? You want to progressively build and scaffold from one content piece to another. So we learn in relation to what we already know. So it's all about building on student prior knowledge. So you put in tools like giving the teacher the ability to create elaborated analogies on a topic. So it might be difficult for a teacher to relate cellular respiration to a student in a way that will connect it to something they're familiar with. But with the generative AI, you can
Mhm.
create an arbitrary number of analogies until you land on one that's like, this one's pretty good. I can use this and explain
Yeah.
the topic to my
Yeah.
student, or coming up with numerous examples and non-examples to explain a topic, the boundaries of what it is and what it isn't. Or again, creating supplemental practice materials, these kinds of things. You speed up that process because we can't
Mhm.
expand the amount of time a teacher has to plan, but we can compress the amount of time it takes to make any one move in planning.
Of course.
So we're not trying to say put the student in front of an AI tutor and it's going to solve all of our problems. It doesn't work like that. And most AI
Yeah.
tutors kind of failed to yield results that are on par with a human tutor. In fact, they're usually a little worse. Is an AI tutor better than no tutor? Studies have shown that, right? That some
Yeah.
tutoring
Yeah.
is better
Yeah.
than no tutoring, but human tutoring versus AI tutoring, human tutoring is still superior. So what we have done for the teacher is, recently we did a great pilot program with a cohort of teachers in Teach for America, and we got some great feedback from those folks. And it was exactly that. It's like you freed up my time in making all of these supplemental materials and resources that I could then focus in on, creating very particular resources for a particular population in my
Mhm.
classroom.
Mhm.
Not personalization per se in terms of like, oh, the student likes NASCAR, so I reference NASCAR, some, shallow level. It was, I have short answer questions, but some students can't handle the short answer questions. So I was able to translate them into multiple choice questions really quickly and not burn 20
Got
minutes to
it.
do it. And then
Yeah. Yeah.
I can build from there. Or maybe I need an additional explanation for this particular complex area, or I need a keyword assignment to introduce tricky vocabulary words, do some pre-teaching type of things. Just like all of these moves where a teacher takes an action, it sets off 25 minds in different directions. It's
Mm.
tough to anticipate where those minds are going to go, but having an AI tool allows you to again quickly generate materials to address a very minute concern in the classroom, whereas
Got
typically
it.
teachers
Yeah.
for a long time have had to teach to the mean of the class. Now you can teach the
Mm.
students who are on either side of that mean.
Beautiful. Yeah. And that's an important type of personalization, right?
Exactly.
Which is the way that the students are best digesting the
Mhm.
material. And also, like you said, there's that time. Yeah, we're able to those micro things, those small things, right, that come up in the classroom that may be very time consuming in the past. So something that's coming up for me is I'm thinking there would be ways to implement AI that would, we're saving time for the teacher, but it would maybe influence the quality of the teaching. And it
Mhm.
sounds like what you've done is presented this in a way where it's it's more focused on taking the strengths of the teacher and the knowledge of the teacher and just cutting out maybe sort of the working, like you said, compressing the working
Mhm.
time. And I'm just curious, like, yeah, just maybe speak to how you set it up so that it's more to amplify the teacher's skills rather than make it easier in ways that
Mhm.
might cut the quality of education. Is that making sense?
Yeah, here's an example of something that we're thinking a lot about in this upcoming this update to the platform. is we've made the editor such that you could say bring in an existing piece of content that you have. Maybe it's a textbook passage or an informative text of some kind.
Yeah.
You could highlight a portion of that text and insert a check for understanding directly about that text right after it.
Yeah.
Before, a teacher would have to go, okay, what part of this am I really trying to get to? And
Yeah.
okay, how should I shape the question? Then does
Mm.
the question reference, like, is the answer given away somewhere else in the text? Is it a
Yeah.
good question? What level am I trying to get at? Is this just a mere recall?
Mhm.
Am I identifying something? Am I having the students engage in some form of evaluation or analysis? There's a lot of small moves a teacher has to make. We just make it
Mhm.
such that we identify what those moves are. These
Yeah.
are a set of deep questions to engage students in meaning making. Then you can create those deep questions. You have an option, three or four of them. You can pick which one best suits yourself. You have an editor where you can go in and change that in any way that you please. And then you can insert it into the document that you have. And this way, it's not whole cloth creating new things, although you can do that on Eduaid if you so choose. But it's all about the supplemental instructional piece.
Got
That's
it. Yeah.
really the focus. And I think that's probably one of the better affordances of an AI. Now, can you
Sure.
say
Yeah.
draft a unit plan on Eduaid? Yeah, you can do that. Typically, that'll mean you bring in a curriculum document, which you can upload. You share
Yeah.
what your learning objectives are. You share the relevant standards. So
Mm.
we ingest all of this contextual information. And then
Mm.
based on that, that really does a lot to set the parameters for what it can be. So really, what
Got it.
Eduaid is a marriage of two things. We take a lot of the research we're doing and we'll spell out what the parameters of a jigsaw activity or a discussion prompt or a deep question or direct instruction should be. So for direct
Mhm.
instruction, there might be you want checks for understanding throughout. You want to break up the monotonous teacher talk into smaller chunks. You want to be able to maybe do some turn and talks for the students to check in with each other and maybe you ask some discussion questions, these kinds of
Mhm.
things. So we bring that piece. The teacher then brings what is their curriculum, what is their objective, what are their standards. These two things come together. We have the parameters, we'll generate within them, and then the teacher can employ it. And of course, like any reform or any practice in education, it gets filtered through that teacher. They might
Exactly.
deflect a part of it, they might augment it, revise it, remix it. We make it really open for a teacher to then kind of play with those resources and
Yeah.
again, revise, remix, reshape, and adjust.
Amazing. Yeah. Yeah, it really sounds like you've set it up to elicit high quality information, high quality, what you put into this is going to determine what comes out of it, right? So it's really prompting a high level of detail, high level of thoughtfulness in what the teacher is inputting so that we get a really high quality
Yeah.
either lesson plan or exercise or whatever it may be.
So we're
There.
very exacting in the structure of the material, and
Yeah.
then we kind of prompt the teacher, so to speak, to
Yeah.
share not just a mere topic statement, like you're not going to say classical civilizations and then create, like we even have this enhance button that would take that and turn it into a learning objective, where then you are phrasing it in a way in this instructional language to better couch the AI's response to
Mhm.
meet those objectives.
Great. So let's scale up a little bit and
Mhm.
just talk about education in general because there's so much changing in technology and the way that schools and teachers are thinking about what makes successful education. And one of the things we chatted about a little bit before the show is this technocracy, right? Or how we're measuring results, evidence-based learning,
Mhm.
so to speak. I'm just curious what some of your opinions might be on the different ways that this can go, right? So we're constantly teaching towards a certain standard or a certain rapidly moving target point of data-based learning, data-driven evidence, right? So yeah, maybe you can speak to this a little bit. What are the different ways you could see this playing out, or what do you think is the most essential part of this process for preserving a high quality, dynamic education?
Yeah, I hesitate to make any predictions, but I'll speak to what I think might be the best path forward, which is something that unfortunately I think is denigrated a lot by well, not necessarily educational researchers. They're screaming to the heavens about this, but is definitely denigrated in practice, which is things like 21st century skills or critical thinking or these things that you
Mhm.
hear brought up. You can't teach critical thinking, right? It's not something that's taught in a vacuum, right? It's an emergent property from knowledge acquisition, which is not that sexy of a thing to talk about in education. People don't like the idea of memorization or memory, but it's true. It's very important. The question you're going to get from students is, why do I need to memorize this when I can look it up or I could ask ChatGPT about it. We should be working towards skills and ability, but all of this is predicated on a base of declarative, procedural, and conceptual knowledge. Knowledge is what matters. Here's what I'm going to get at, though. So, critical thinking, if we were to take an analogy, is asking students to connect the dots, right? To apply knowledge to a novel situation effectively. Can I
Mhm.
solve a problem using what I know and then solve the problem well in a way that is effective and efficient? That's predicated on having a store of knowledge in memory, right? It's not something that you can look up. You build shallow fluency when you do that, really shallow, hollow understanding. It doesn't really exist.
Yeah.
It's thin. It's not really there, right? But when a human has something memorized, it's very relational. We attribute meaning to these things. We attribute experiences to these things, and we build structures of memory, and we're able to relate concepts to one another and use them to
Yeah.
solve problems. So any good educational program is necessarily going to stress knowledge. Knowledge is the
Mhm.
substrate for all higher order thinking. You can't connect the dots unless you have dots to connect, right? You need the knowledge in place in order to reason about that knowledge, in order to think deeply about that. Expertise is merely it's actually an amazing thing, but expertise is the accretion of domain specific knowledge applied to different problems within that domain and with beyond it
Mhm.
effectively and efficiently. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I keep coming back to it and sound like a broken record, but that's ultimately what schools need to focus on
Mhm.
and something that they're missing in favor of skills training and things like this. But if you don't know the proper time and place to apply a skill and what the procedure for applying it is and what the broader conceptual pieces are for why you're even applying this skill to this problem or whatever it might be, then you're kind of flying rudderless. And with AI and with limitless internet search and all of these things, it's easy to see why folks would denigrate the acquisition of knowledge. But today, I think more critically than ever, the most important memory is the one you have up here, not the memory
Mhm.
on your computer system, not the one that your AI has. It's the memory that you have. It's a very relational, experiential type of memory that is not something that can be mimicked on any computer system yet.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you bring this up because this is a hot topic, but at the same time, it's also been around probably since you and I were in early education, maybe just Wikipedia or,
Hmm.
things are we have this access to look things up, Google, right? And
Hmm.
still back then teachers are stressing exactly what you're talking about. There is a process to learning these things. There's a process. And that's actually what I think is very key is the process of being able to take in the information as opposed to we're just going to reference material, right? Because,
Yeah.
like you said, that builds a stronger conceptual base for people to reason, connect dots, make arguments, form opinions, right? Apply knowledge, and like you said, to actually develop mastery or expertise in a certain area. So we'll probably see that. Yeah, go ahead. We'll
Hmm.
probably see
And
that change.
then you have like talking about, say, like adaptive instruction, right? So you have adaptive agents or AIs or tutors or whatever, or what you were talking about, like data-driven instruction or things like this. There is no panacea or silver bullet in education. Like the most uncomfortable truth that a teacher in a school system, an institution has to face is that teaching is a game of probabilities. That's all it is. You're never going to create the perfect environment where learning will always take place. You are using certain methods, certain procedures, certain routines, certain techniques, certain tools and resources to increase the probability or likelihood that learning will take place in this environment. It's never guaranteed for all of your students all the time. It's something that kind of works piecemeal, resource by resource, method by method. Now, there are methods that are better suited at increasing those probabilities than others: retrieval practice, interleaving, spacing, referencing prior knowledge, actionable, timely, specific feedback after deliberate practice sessions. All of these
Mhm.
things are go a long way towards improving the conditions in which learning might take place. But there's also practices that can actively undermine it. Unguided discovery
Mhm.
learning, for example, or project-based learning with no reference to student prior knowledge in terms of do they have the skills needed and knowledge needed in order to execute the project effectively and efficiently, or say dogmatic adherence to like learning styles or something like this. Like there's plenty
Yeah,
of
yeah.
practices that can decrease the odds that learning will take place and plenty of practices that may increase the odds that learning will take place, but there's no practice that will guarantee foolproof that learning will take place.
Exactly. Yeah, and there may be ways to use these tools that do elicit this process
Mhm.
of properly
Certainly.
memorizing it, but we always want to be careful about not undermining, like you said, the key skills that are going to allow kids to have the environment where they're encouraged to think critically about information, or that's something that's elicited from the way the tool is being used, not something that's weakened by yeah. I think you see what I'm saying here. But something else I want to touch on is, like you said, there is no kind of perfect environment for learning. And we spoke a little bit earlier about the things that there are these AI coaches, right? Or these AI sort of tutors, so to speak, being implemented. And there's a very key aspect to having the teacher there in person and their specified skill set of
Mhm.
being with the student. So I'm wondering what are some of the qualities to that relationship that you think are increasingly challenging or difficult to replace with any kind of technology? And what is the value of that? The
Yeah.
teacher skill. Yeah.
AI has no sense of being in the world, doesn't have experiences, doesn't have emotions, it doesn't have feelings, it doesn't have memory in the way that we do. Thus, when an AI is interacting with a student, it's interacting with the student at the levels of language, right? You're really just kind of playing a language game with an AI. And what that misses are a lot of nonverbal cues that a teacher can pick up on in ways that I'm not sure an AI tutor, even an AI tutor with computer vision, could pick up on. I mean, we can barely get a car to stop at an intersection with a piece of metal in it so it doesn't pop the tire, but we're going to pick up on, students slouching or looking off and then knowing that that is somehow related to an experience they had the night before at home that is now weighing on them, right? An AI doesn't have this embodied experience in the world that a teacher does, right? So a teacher, when they're interacting with a student, they can pick up on these subtle, nonverbal kind of relational clues that the student has, so to speak. So when I'm working with a student one on one, and I see that the student is, maybe says, I don't know to the question that I asked. Well, that I don't know can carry a lot of weight, right? That you don't get when you're typing I don't know onto the keyboard. So student
Yeah.
says I don't know to the AI tutor. The AI tutor will say, you can do it, maybe give a hint or a clue at the beginning and maybe say, let's
Yeah.
start at the first step and then explain what the first step is. Maybe it does that really well. It doesn't, but let's assume that it does. Okay. So then the student says, I don't know again, because they don't want to engage with this material today. The AI tutor, again, maybe we'll give another hint, maybe even give a great little piece to relate the first step to something in prior knowledge or ask a different type of question to elicit a different response. Student says
Mm.
IDK again, and what do we get? Typically, most of the time, if you look at some of the studies, you'll see the AI tutor will respond with the answer and then move on to the next piece. The teacher
Mm.
might then pick up that the student's I don't know is be a little more dour or a little with a tone of a bit of acid on the word, so to speak. It's like, okay, clearly it's not about the problem that they're engaging with. You know, how are
Yeah.
you feeling? Is everything okay? Then you might start asking questions that are a little more interpersonal because you pick up on those
Yeah.
cues. AI has no relational skills, does not have an embodied experience of the world. Two things that I think are fundamentally important that a teacher has that no system really yet has in its tool belt. Additionally, students can interpret questions and take them in ways that you would not even predict or imagine that they might. And I do worry about increasing amounts of like AI personalization. My instance of ChatGPT is different than your instance of ChatGPT. It's picked up on how we use language a little bit differently. I worry that it might pick up on some bad habits that students have in the use of language and
Sure.
kind of
Yeah.
reflect those back to the student in search of engagement, right? Engagement is a very hollow measure. When Eduaid was going around looking at doing some potential fundraising, that's a question we got a lot of, like how long are the user sessions and how deeply are they engaging with the product. I'm like, but the main thing is about efficiency. So ideally the teacher wouldn't spend
Yeah.
too much time on Eduaid. They would get what they need and then go do teaching. They wouldn't spend all their bloody time on Eduaid just constantly playing with it because it's so sticky or whatever. It's like I want it to be efficient, not engaging, so to speak. I want it to be a tool that is a sustainable thing a teacher can bring into their practice. So I'm not sure that one, the incentives of the system are aligned well enough to do a good job at tutoring. B, I don't think it has the embodied experience of the world necessary to engage with students on a very emotional and relational level. And then C, I just don't think it's very good at mastering pedagogy just yet in this kind of free form student facing side. When you have like a teacher facing tool, there's very clear guardrails. A teacher is asking for the AI to create sentence stems to help differentiate a material, not, answer questions and then have those questions then need to fork into an analogy and then move into an example and then get an explanation and then to the next problem. So there's too many variables that might occur that are well beyond the AI's training data for it to solve those problems. So
Like,
tutoring's
yeah,
too complex.
of course. Yeah. And there may be like, for example, use cases for adults, right? Like
Mhm.
in corporations, right? They're being tutored to have a certain sales conversation or something.
Oh, certainly.
But they've developed so much of the social emotional intelligence already. And the kids, they're in a completely different environment, right? And so, like you said, to have that human engagement where they're able to, focus on root motivations, right? And actually get to the bottom of what's going on with the student and then like influence and even just be a guide in that moment of life for the kid, right?
hmm
Yeah.
the chess player Gary Kasparov, he played an early chess bot in the 90s, IBM's Deep Blue or
Yeah.
something like that. And he
Yeah.
got beat, and it was like the first time he's lost, and it was tough for him to accept. So then he developed this theory about how he believes that AI human symbiosis, like you have an AI and a human playing chess together against another just AI, that it would beat the other AI. He was wrong when it came to chess. But that same premise might actually be pretty effective for teaching. I've used, for example, I was teaching US history, and we were talking about Abraham Lincoln's campaign for when he was running for president. So what I did is I took a custom GPT. I provided it with the collected speeches, letters, and works of Abraham Lincoln, right? And I would moderate kind of like an interview with this Abraham Lincoln bot with the students, and the students were able to ask questions, and the bot would then pull from the speeches and provide the citations and the references and all of this. And that kind of interaction was quite fruitful because then the students are engaging and asking, much deeper questions than I might be able to answer off the cuff, or that might be expressed in the book, or might come across, skimming through the 1,200 pages of letters and speeches. That's an interesting use case to me. Or having some level of problems popping up and then the students answering the problem and the AI kind of providing another problem to them, and that kind of thing. But it's all mediated by the teacher. The teacher still has to be in the loop with the student AI interaction. And to the credit of some other AI companies like Magic School, for example, that have student facing AI tutors, they provide rooms where the teacher is monitoring and interacting with the student and the AI. That's a much more
Right.
fruitful way of doing it than something like Conmigo, where you're just throwing the student in front of an AI chatbot and saying, "Best of luck. Don't understand it. Go watch a YouTube video." Well, that's not really how learning works.
Yeah, exactly. So when it comes to the things that EduAid is focused on in the future, say like the next 12 months, what are some of the metrics for growth and improvement in the next year? What are some of the things you'd like to have accomplished or
Number
yeah.
one piece of interest to us are building out an infrastructure for verification and evaluation of AI outputs and their relative fitness for use in the classroom. That's
Yeah.
the biggest piece, because I worry that, and I think we see this online today, you have a proliferation of AI slop pretty much everywhere, invading
Hmm.
blogs, invading Google Images, invading short form video content, advertising. It's everywhere, and
Absolutely.
it's very low quality. It's not that I don't believe that it is that people will dislike the use of AI for creative work. It's that they dislike the unedited, untailored, unthinking use of AI. That is the very base sloppiness, right? Have I ever used some form of AI in my writing, for example? Certainly. Do I use it to write everything? No. I use it to edit, say, or suggest possible ways of
Yeah.
reframing a sentence. And when you
Yeah.
think about it, language at that level, that becomes a little more interesting. You become like it's a good analogy, like a producer for music, hip hop music. You take samples and then you remix those samples and you layer them and you add different
Yeah.
pieces. You can do that
Yeah.
with language when you're working with an AI, but when you just using AI one shot, here's the output, and then I go put it somewhere. It's slop. It's never really good. You
Yeah.
want to take a line here, a line there, write some of your
Hmm.
own lines, and you
Hmm.
kind of build this amalgam of different things. So my concern then is that people would use AI tools for education in that unthinking way, as opposed to this way where they're revising, remixing, rearranging,
Exactly.
stacking different things. So EduAid's focus is all about how do we put in tools that encourage the users to do this revision, to do this remixing, to do this revising of the work. I think we're going to accomplish a lot of that in this upcoming release that we have in a few weeks here, where
Oh, yeah.
you'll be able to do the evals of the materials and then make changes based on the results of those evaluations. We want to make the knowledge graph more accessible so you're able to actually interact with some of these learning sciences principles that we're using in the piece. So it's all about lowering that translation cost from research to practice, making the system more transparent such that teachers can evaluate the quality of those materials and then are empowered to make changes based on those evaluations. That's the biggest
Mm,
piece. It's not making a student tutor. That's not really on our radar. We'll leave that to the
sure.
folks who are doing it. Once someone figures it out and does a really good version, perhaps then Eduaid will adopt
Yeah.
it. And but
Yeah.
not it's not something that we're going to dump a bunch of development resources in now. We'll focus on teacher facing where we can do good work.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's great. And like we've been talking about this the whole conversation, and intermittently is the focusing on the quality of the input, right? And having it be detailed, having it be multi-layered, not just make a lesson plan for me, pump it out, right? It's like to accurately prompt and then be able to scale that, right, throughout the use. And like you said, have some way of ensuring the quality of that at a
Yeah,
broader scale.
the
Yeah, that's a
process is
great thing
too
to focus on.
fast. The
Yeah,
process is too fast on Eduate today. If you go
yeah,
to Eduate right now, as we're recording this November 5th,
yeah,
you select a resource, you type in a topic, and then you create it. I think that's a little too fast. So now we're slowing
yeah,
it
yeah,
down to
yeah,
where you select a resource, then we'll ask you a question about your learning objective. We'll start at the learning objective. If you don't know what a
yeah,
learning objective is, we have a resource that will connect you to a nice essay on what makes a good learning objective and what's the point of it. And then we'll ask
yeah.
you about your curriculum standards. So then you attach a certain number of standards. You attach a curriculum document. You can share a website you want to use as context. You will select the reading level that you want. You have all of these kind of levers that you pull that adds a lot of contextual information inserted all throughout these prompt structures that we write, such that we really get a high quality input from the teacher,
Yeah.
a high quality input from ourselves that we're writing for the system prompts in
Mhm.
such a way that what you then get is maybe it's not going to be
High
perfect. It's not
quality.
going to
Yeah.
please every single teacher all the time, but it will be a much higher starting place than, say, a rough draft, right? Ernest
Yeah.
Hemingway said the first
Yeah.
draft of anything is shit. We're trying to
Right.
make the first draft slightly above that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not slightly above, much, much
Yeah.
higher
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
at a place where, like, if you used it, it would be good. But it's a
Right.
really good starting place for you to do a few moves on top of it and make it really great. And that's
Yeah.
that's the place we want to be at.
And either way, that saves the teacher the time of putting it together from scratch, right? And now they have something better to start with, where they can devote their time and attention to making it, to improving it, rather than building the structure just from the
Now
start. So,
there's of
yeah.
course some concerns there, right? You don't want the starting place to be something that puts the teacher kind of in the wrong direction, right? And you don't want the starting place to be so narrow that they only have that area. So like all of our lesson plans, for example, we'll always suggest three activities for each piece of it. We want to provide multiple points of entry so a teacher can kind of graze over this and say, I like this piece and zero in on that and discard the rest because AI
Amazing.
is all about scavenging, right? How quickly can you find a great line and then you employ that line in your own writing or employ that question and with your other questions and just really want to encourage the what teachers already do. I mean, teaching is a game of scavenging for materials all over the place from a bunch of curriculum, other teachers that have come before you, younger teachers, etc. You're always, I read this Harry Wong, The First Weeks of School. He talks about the game of the teacher is to beg, borrow, and steal, right? You take
Huh.
educational materials from everywhere. And that's if you can do that with an AI and put it all in one place, it makes that whole scavenging process much quicker.
Amazing. Yeah. Just gives more access to
Exactly.
variety. Yeah. Brilliant. As you enter into this growth period for the next year, what do you foresee being some of the major challenges that you might come across? And in particular, ones that if you had some rapid way of solving them, you would apply, you wish you could have some kind of easy solution to apply to these,
Mhm.
but perhaps is, yeah.
So I think generally the boom of generative AI tools that we're seeing now, and the boon of funding around it's probably a bubble. I would assume it really smells like a bubble. It looks like a bubble. It'll
Yeah.
probably pop
Yeah.
like a bubble at some point.
Yeah.
So you want to avoid all of those bubbly tendencies, which is over promising and under delivering, right? That's you want to really establish expectations clearly. What am I going to get here? You're going to get pieces of a lesson. You're going to get pieces of educational resources, but it's up to you to then progressively build those and stack those. That's how we can assure quality. So
Yeah.
we're going to be battling against ease. I wonder if there's going to be bad behaviors that get inculcated from other AI tools that we then have to
Yeah.
compete against. Just the accepting of slop, or we're going to be battling taste, right?
Mm,
Because how well you use an AI will come down to how much taste you have for writing,
yeah.
your aesthetic taste, your literary tastes. Taste is going to be one of the more important quality control measures that someone has. So how
Yeah.
do we how do we simulate good taste, or how do we put a teacher in a position to where they can have good taste even if they're not completely sure what the end goal for a particular educational resource might be. The other piece is an AI has no conception of what evidence-based instruction is. It has no conception of what good instruction is. It knows that there are materials that get called good. So what you're then trying to do is play a
Mm,
language game with an AI to get it to simulate evidence-based instruction. It's not doing evidence-based instruction. It's doing the facsimile of
yeah,
artifice of evidence-based instruction. So how do we get the form of evidence-based instruction down, and then the teacher brings the meaning? But then how do we ensure that the teacher's able to bring the meaning and not just kind of taken over by AI slop and all over the place?
completely.
It's a delicate dance. It's one
Yeah.
that we've been doing now for since 2023. I think we're getting better at it, which is good. I would be worried if we were getting worse, but it's one that we're going to continue to have to do. Figure
Mhm.
out what good taste in teaching is, and then
Yeah.
get that in the system.
Yeah, that's very important because, and it's really good that you mentioned that because that is how these models work, right? They're not, people get the sense when they're using these tools that
Mhm.
some of us are easily convinced that it's doing things we don't actually, that it's not actually doing, right? Which
Yeah.
is in reality, it's just giving us a copy, like a facsimile,
Mhm.
yeah, an impression of something that it's gathered by the language we put in. Yeah, well
That's
put.
something like
Yeah,
hallucinations, right? We
yeah,
attribute
yeah,
that
yeah,
as
yeah.
like a state of mind, but it's the AI doing its job perfectly well. The
Exactly. Yeah, yeah,
response
yeah,
is
yeah.
perfectly statistically defensible. It's
Yeah,
a statistically reasonable response, just factually inaccurate. That
yeah,
tells you everything you need to know about an AI. It has no grounding in fact. It's just a
right.
statistical model of language, a really
Mhm,
elegant one, a
mhm.
really sophisticated one that looks like thinking, that looks like reasoning,
Yeah.
but it's not that.
For the listeners or for people who are in this space, if you have any closing thought, kind of word of wisdom, simple statement about what you think is the best way to move in to this future of learning, what might you say to those people?
The most important memory is still the one in your head. That's the
Hmm.
first piece. Trinity of educational practice that we should aim for is retrieval, interleaving, and spacing. Read a bunch of stuff that was written well before the dawn of the digital age so you can, inculcate
Yes.
some taste. Read some Henry James, read Borges, Joseph Heller, read
Yeah.
classic literature,
Yeah.
read Shakespeare. I mean, it's not
Exactly.
that stylish to say anymore, but you have to read great works, watch great films, listen to great music, look at great art to understand what greatness looks like so you're able to
Yeah.
effectively critique what the AI's responses are. Because if you don't have
Mhm.
taste, you'll accept slop because you don't know any better. You don't know any different. So,
Yeah.
yep, knowledge is important and you want to accrue knowledge that are of great ideas. You want to join the great conversation. Read Mortimer J. Adler, read the great books of the Western world, all of these types of things.
Very
That
well
wasn't
put.
so
Yeah.
pithy. That wasn't pithy,
No,
but it's the best I
that's
have
great.
for.
I mean, that's very important, right? We need to develop taste. We need to develop proper critique and proper thinking through these high quality, what's been revered throughout history as greatness, and that really does feed our ability to maintain a higher standard as we move forward in this day and age.
And it
So
syncs up
great.
well with the
Yeah,
philosophy of education I've laid out so far. So I'm glad
yeah,
my premise and
absolutely.
conclusion are
Yeah,
syncing up, or else I'd be disappointed.
yeah. We get a good grade on the essay. It all lines up. Thomas, thank you so much for sharing such a high level of detail on all these different topics and just for being open to having a conversation about these important trends we're seeing moving in education. So
Well, I
really
appreciate
appreciate
it.
it.
My
Yeah,
wife doesn't let me
yeah.
talk about it that much, so I always take an
There you
opportunity to
go.
talk to someone else. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. A perfect outlet. Well, yeah, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you.
And where can people support, they go to your website, EduAid. Is there any other place you'd recommend
Yeah,
people go
I
to
mean, if
supporting?
if you didn't think I went on ad nauseum, you could check out my Substack, which is probably just the written version of this verbal salad I've thrown out today. And that's called The Learning Stack at substack.com. You can
Great.
check that out. There's some interviews over there, some essays, whatnot. And it's, of course, Eduaide.ai, and same thing for all the socials, Eduaid.ai.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much again for
Thank
joining
you.
us, Thomas. Yeah, cheers.